Imagine you're looking at a magazine and there's a room or an image that you want to use to create an idea for some interior space, right? You could be looking at something and thinking, gee, what if this wall were lined with books? What if there was a rug along the floor here, or a set of ceiling clouds in here? Let's see what happens if I try to take that picture right, and think about it from the point of view of this is a representation of a space, similar as the depth cues exercise where we're looking at a photograph of an interior. In that case, we're outside. But here, we're quite obviously indoors, right? But for all intents and purposes, we're looking at same phenomena, right? We are viewing in perspective something that converges to a horizon, right? My line of sight, and this is what we tried to figure out in the last drawings. And I'm going to trace freehand now, but let's say, so you always want to understand where you're looking. The horizon, if you're drawing whatever it is that you lightly pencil in, right? And we're looking with our perspective here converges to a point out here. It's beyond the picture, right? So the photographer took the camera and moved this way and aimed in that direction, if you can imagine that, right? So all I'm doing now is trying to understand, and then there's a back plane here. This is actually a 2-point perspective because as you see, these two lines gently vanish off to some point way back there. Maybe I'm going to introduce very gently now the concept of a spatial edge. And that is, now in this picture, this is really minimal, but let's imagine that this defined the boundary of my picture, right? Over here. And it continued back here, and I'm going to make believe that Okay, so that one side of it would form an edge. Now that would normally be done with furnishings or other things that appear in perspective. We don't have anything in this environment right now, but the picture, now the drawing that you've created is essentially this, right? That is, in essence, that the drawing. This is your vanishing point. That everything converges there. I'll take this image, scan it, so all I'm doing right now is scanning the trace image that I made. Then I can take this image too and scan it, or look up in the magazine where I may find it. I'm sure an advertisement, right? So let me see if I can switch windows here. There's an image of the scan drawing, right? That's the drawing that I want to work on. But now that I have a scan of it, I can print it, right? So let's see what happens. Good idea to convert it to PDF first, but I'm just going to send it over to my printer. Now let me send it. Let me create a PDF. The problem is I can't tell the printer to keep it black and white. So let's print this, save it, scan, and then I'm gonna, so just imagine that you hear my printer working now. Okay. It's got scaled to fit the page. So once you've scanned it, um, you have a copy of it, right? So now you can scribble. You can make decisions about what's going in here, but quite simply, let's first identify the parts of this picture, right? That doesn't right. What are the parts? That's looking out the window, right? This is a ceiling. That's a wall. That's the floor. Right? Ceiling, wall, floor, view. Consider that now, right? I'm I'm going to share different screen now. I'm going to log into what Suffolk University calls a virtual desktop. So I'm going to share a different window. And I'm going to open a program called Adobe Photoshop. So if I start at this menu, by the way, you can customize your environment. If you don't want to have to hunt for the application every time you find it, just select it here and drag it over, drag a link over to your task bar. Okay, and then you can click on it here. So this is a kind of an abbreviated route to Photoshop. But I'm hoping that it gives you reason to try this straight away and generate a result in little time, and hopefully that'll be reinforcing enough to uh, persuade you or prompt you to try out some more complex things. This is what interface opens when you open Photoshop by default. You always get a what's new screen, which you can click, right? Because we already have an image, you see this drag and drop image, I can use that, right? I'm going to find where my image is. Actually, I'm going to go offline and put it somewhere. Let's see if that does it. Because I converted it to PDF. I'm going to move the original bitmap image, that is the image file itself, over to that folder. So there's the image itself, right? And what I'm going to do with that is do what Photoshop is actually prompting me to do, drag and drop an image. That's all I'm going to do. Drag and dropped an image. I think I drag and dropped an image. Yep, it's working. It's reading it. It's going to load it. Okay. There's my image in Photoshop. There's my original drawing. There's my image. Photoshop allows you to create things called layers. That is, remember I identified, which is not in the picture you see in Photoshop, with the ceiling, wall, and floor and view. But imagine that each one of these, 1, 2, and 3, was a separate entity called a layer. So I can stack representations of those in and organize them in Photoshop and control how they display by changing their position relative to each other. So think of them as sort of one piece of trace on top of another, right? That you stack on top of this, except you can see through and control the visibilities. The other thing significant about Photoshop, I'm just selecting one of these tools that allows me to make this a little bit bigger. When you create a line drawing, provided that the lines are complete, you can actually select the areas that they enclose. I have a little bit of a gap up here, which I'm going to fix. So let me explain what I mean by that. There's a select tool. It's drawing that toolbar off screen. Let me. Quick selection tool. Sorry that took so long. I can click on different areas, and it by default it adds them together as part of a selection, which is highlighted by that little animated background that you see. So I can take that, right, selection and save it. Save selection and call it something, and call it view layer. Well, let's just call it view, not to complicate things, right? To deselect something, you can type the characters Control D. Let me get my keyboard. I don't know if you can see that. Control D just deselects things. So if I click in here, it's the selection tool is a little too refined. I'll have to change the tolerance to think we can, no. That's the wand selection. All right, I'm going to pause this here. 20 minutes is long enough. But ignore the last things that I did. But understand that once having saved the selection, I can then reload it. If I tell Photoshop to load my selection, I can select this channel that I created called View and hit OK. And because that part of the image is selected, I'm working in the background, I can paste something into it. So let's say I had a photograph. Boston. Save image. Remember, I downloaded this image called Boston. Now I'm going to open it in Photoshop. That's not the image I wanted. Nevertheless, I'm going to select it. Right? Control A. It's just a Windows command. Copy that. Go back to my original. Right? I'm going to create a layer associated with this. This is a new layer command. Create a new layer. And call this View of Boston Street. However,